wrapped up in the things you are here to fulfill. Whatever you choose for a career path, remember the struggles along the way are only meant to shape you for your purpose.
Welcome to In Bloom. I am your host, Michaela Richmond, and this is a Pro Humanity podcast. On today's episode of In Bloom, I have on Joel Bein. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Ella. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay. So I have you on to talk about a couple of really cool things. I know you and I both like to talk about philosophy and we both like to think a lot. So we'll get into that. But before we do, can you tell me a little bit about, so first your book and second, the projects you're working on?
Yeah. I just published my first book. It's called Do It Now, a finished book. And it's super short. It's about 30 pages. It's basically short chapters in blog post type format. And it's a very meta book for me, where I'm encouraging people in the book to finish their creative ambitions, to follow through on their intentions, to complete and engage in that bias for shipping and finishing. That's why the subtitle is A Finished Book. And so for me, it's meta because it's not a perfect book. It's not A+ book in my mind. And it's kind of fun because if anybody has a flaw to point out in the book, to me, that actually adds value to the message, because I'm seeking to model that it's okay to finish things that are not perfect. And the way that you grow and keep improving on your creative goals is to get those repetitions in. So that's the sort of theme of it. And there's different little chapters that I riff on, different ideas, and then in the realm of getting things done, productivity, and conscientiousness and motivation, psychology. I talk a lot about, it's not just about doing things, but doing things that make you come alive, doing things that are in line with your purpose, doing things that are intrinsically motivating rather than something you think you're supposed to do. So like I have a chapter called Should, and it's about the word should and how I find it valuable to eliminate that word from my vocabulary entirely in order to get into a mindset of excitement and play versus extrinsic obligation, duty. So that's a little window into the book. And yeah, I'll pass it back to you, I suppose.
That's awesome. I'm definitely going to ask you some more questions about both coming alive and the difference between should and like that whole duty idea, because it's a big one and it's really interesting. Can you give a little bit of a background of what you're working on with CareerHackers? Because that's your other project.
Right. Yeah, CareerHackers is my main project right now professionally, careerhackers.com. And that's our mission is to help people discover and do what makes them come alive. And in the realm of careers, we're teaching people to forge their paths and engage in curiosity, creativity, and value creation in order to land professional opportunities without relying on traditional pathways of degrees, credentials, resumes, cover letters, all that vein, which, if you think about most people, if they hear the word resume, they don't jump out of their seat in joy, right? These are boring things. We want people to be excited, creative, fulfilled, alive. And so I'm running a newsletter called the Daily Job Hunt newsletter that goes out, of course, every single day, every weekday, and Saturdays, that is. And that's the main content that I'm creating every single day underneath that CareerHackers brand. And then CareerHackers has, if you go to the website, you'll just see we're building out this robust library of media content, sharing this mindset, blog posts about creative mindset, blog posts about how to build your brand, how to perform well on an interview. We have resources showcasing top books, top coaches, top communities, top tools to engage with, to kind of empower and fuel your career and your growth. And again, it's all channeled towards this mission to help people discover and do what makes them come alive, and to realize that they have personal agency, that people as humans were born with curiosity and volition as our tools on this planet, to be able to activate the mind and say, I'm choosing to think and go in this direction and make this decision, right? So when you engage that volition, you have a lot of potential to forge your own path and to write your own script in life, so that you can live regret-free and create something meaningful, create something that it's aligned with your purpose. So that's the essence of Career Hackers.
My goodness, I love that. So, okay. It was so difficult for me before I was really into praxis and this new wave of looking at the world. It was really difficult for me to take everything that I am and put it onto a piece of paper and explain who I am on a resume. What are some of the things that young people are searching for right now that Career Hackers does a good job of giving them? Like, is it tips and tricks? Is it a mindset shift? Like, what exactly are the things that people should come to Career Hackers for?
Yeah, what comes to mind is, and I'm really focusing on at the moment, is self-directed learning mindset. Mm-hmm. And to say, even if you're starting at ground zero, even if you're at any age stage of your life, you can choose to learn anything. And that starts with, again, curiosity, and just encouraging people to pause and ask, what am I curious about? I mean, we're not, when we grow up, most of us going to school, we're not offered that question, because we're told we need to learn these certain subjects at this certain time. And so, what Praxis does, what Career Hackers does, and by the way, in case any listeners didn't get the connection, Career Hackers is an extension of Praxis, the apprenticeship program for young people. And we're teaching this mindset to the world at large. So self-directed learning and portfolio building and learning out loud, to say, and which is something that you're doing really well with your 2 podcasts, and to say, I'm going to figure out this new tech tool, or I'm going to learn about marketing by starting a marketing podcast and then finding people who are seasoned in that field and asking them to come on the podcast. And now you just created a podcast and you've built your portfolio, you've built your network, and you're learning. I mean, that's something, again, that you're doing really well. It's one of the best things you can possibly do for your career, is to start a podcast, because it's a triple win for learning, network building, and portfolio building. And so then, and in the portfolio category, when a potential company is looking you up on the World Wide Web, right, which is probably going to happen if they're all interested in you, you want to have a reputation. You want to have like a website and portfolio to come up in those search results. That's going to have a signal. It's going to send a message about the type of person you are, the type of mindset you have. If you have a podcast, it's signaling that you are growth minded, that you are creative, that you have certain tech skills or communication skills, right? So there's a lot you can signal by building a portfolio, and you can start from scratch. That's what I did. You can start with a blog challenge. You can start with taking a course and documenting what you're learning. You can create videos. There's so much you can do if you just, again, kind of focus your mind and say, what do I want to do within this huge amusement park that is the World Wide Web? How can I leverage that and create something meaningful?
Mm-hmm. I like that. You gave an image. You were basically like, the bullet points are supposed to be your signals, right? And I don't think I ever thought about it like this, but this idea of, whenever I was going through high school, everybody was talking about being a National Honor Society member, being, a good grade getter, whatever, doing well in those ways. And it wasn't that they were just check boxes. people in traditional environments, in universities, in jobs that are trying to decide who to hire, they use those things as signals. So if you can decide and find other means for signaling what you want to be, who you want to be, that honestly does it better, because everybody has, all A's and B's. Oh, I was in National Honor Society. It's not unique enough anymore that it's but it does still signal something. And so I think that that's a really, really good point. What was your journey to unlocking yourself, like coming to this place where you actually saw it as signaling, and you mentioned volition a lot. You saw your life as something that you could take control of in some senses.
Yeah, I mean, I could riff on that and get really deep, but to give a more succinct version is just kind of going through college, and I was actually studying to become an educator. I was studying music education as my major, and I was studying music, classical music. I'm a classically trained musician. That's my first passion. I'm still expressing that today. But my first degree was specifically to become trained to be certified to teach K through 12 music. And one of the things that came about from that experience was starting to think more deeply about my philosophy of education. And so while I'm going through this training, I'm starting to activate my mind and get in touch with that inner curiosity and critical thinking hat to say, what is education and what is my philosophy? And that sort of led me to realize that the traditional school system is actually antithetical to my philosophy of education, and realizing that education is not the filling of a vessel, but the kindling of a flame. And education is as individualized as a fingerprint. Education can really only occur when it's intrinsically motivated, and the learner is autonomous and able to make conclusions for himself and make choices about what he or she is going to be learning. And all these are not what's happening in these conventional systems. And so with that, I had planted that seed just before I graduated from that undergraduate degree, but I had all this momentum in my life. And at the time, I didn't have knowledge about how else I might be able to script my life. And so I carried that momentum. I ended up becoming a music teacher in the K through 12 schools. I jumped into that career path that I had been trained to do, even though I had these questions about it already. And so that kind of created this interesting synergy of my story, where I was working in these schools for the better part of my 20s, and at the same time being fundamentally opposed to the system itself. And then I kept kind of listening to podcasts and following my curiosity and having a determination to continue to grow personally, professionally, and pursue what makes me come alive, all those things. And so that's how I eventually found Isaac Morehouse and Praxis and his podcast and TK Coleman. And just kind of once Isaac was able to present his vision for Praxis to create something criticized by creating, in terms of education philosophy, to create this career launch program as an alternative to college, and to say you don't need that credential to get the good job, right? And to realize that to see this new option that could make that carrot that the K through 12 system is always dangling, right? You must get a diploma, because you must in order to get a good job, you need to have a diploma and degree, and that's the carrot that's driving all these systems. And if we can make that obsolete and say you don't need the diploma to have a good job, then these systems can become less relevant, and that can help shatter these old paradigms and create new paradigms. And so when I found Isaac's work, it kind of was immediately drawn to that. It was just basically head over heels for the concept. So that's when I kind of started my own journey and applying a lot of what I learned from he and CK, the founders of Praxis, about building your own portfolio and doing this 30-day blogging challenge and doing a podcast, and eventually, you know, I was like determined to get myself out of my previous career, and then I also wanted to work for Isaac, and eventually ended up doing that, pitching him to work for him back in 2020. So that's the overview of it.
Yeah, that was awesome. So you said this phrase, you said criticize by creating, and I think that that's really interesting. I don't think it's done enough, and I think that I've definitely moved in that way where I used to be the type of person that would criticize often, and I know a lot of people that are that way as well. And I would just criticize. Like I would see something wrong and I would criticize. And it's more powerful to recognize that something is wrong and not only criticize it, but try to get to the heart of why it's wrong. And then once you understand the why behind the issue, then it's so much easier to actually come up with a solution. I think that it's almost hot take, but it's almost lazy to just criticize something because you don't dive into the real problem. Like I was reading a book on systems or something, and it was talking about how there are different aspects of systems. There are the elements, and those are the things that you see. And then there are interconnections, and there are layers within complex systems. And it's interesting because the deeper that you go, the harder it is to understand and find and uncover. But the more that those things influence everything else, it's like a domino effect. The deeper you go, I guess the farther back, closer to the actual start of the domino, it'll affect or whatever. So I really, really like that. Criticize by creating. You also touched on this idea of like, so I think that this is honestly where I really want to take this whole conversation is growing personally and professionally. You mentioned in the beginning this idea of committing yourself to something. So the book that you had, the book that you decided you were going to write, there's an aspect of yourself that knows that it could be better, but you're not going to be a perfectionist about it, because if you're trying to be a perfectionist about something, it'll never get done. Explain a little bit about that whole process, because I imagine that you went back and forth with yourself. Like, is this ready? Should I stop? Should I just put it out there? How do I want to go about this? Why? Well, first, like, what was that process? And then second, why did you decide to just put it out as is?
Yeah, I mean, the whole process of writing to publishing was probably 10 weeks, like conceiving the idea and then writing it up, manuscript. That took about, I just worked on it for 15 minutes a day for 2 weeks, and then it was done in terms of manuscript. And then half the posts are sort of repurposed blog posts, which is another sort of tip to help you write a book, is to write blog posts, and then eventually you have a library of blog posts that you might be able to piece together. And then I kind of took some time to just tweak it, because I am a detailed person, and I want a book is different than a blog post because it's more concrete and substantial, and I wanted it to have good form. I spent time with the order of the chapters, and I spent time tweaking different words to get it really pruned. And at the same time, I was like, I'm teaching people to finish and have a bias for action. So I want to walk the walk in this process. So I just kind of kept that in mind, and I had a playful approach with it. Like, all right, I mean, am I going to do the same thing that I'm teaching people with my creation? So, and I like designed the book cover, which, like, I'm looking at the book right now. I'm like, yeah, that book cover is okay. But I didn't want to spend too much time on it. I mean, it wasn't even a big priority in this book in terms of my other projects in my queue. It was like third or fourth priority in my life as I was doing it. So I didn't want to get obsessive about it. I didn't want to be too thorough with it. And I wanted to get it out the door, and I wanted to have the experience of finishing a book And I also knew that once I finish my first book, then I get the experience and satisfaction of I'm now an author and I've done this once. Okay, now I'm going to iterate on it. And so I have a desire to write future books. I'm not sure what they're going to be yet, but I'm aware of the growth process starts with you. The first time you do something is not going to be the best. Mozart's first symphony is barely played compared to Mozart's last symphony is one of his most famous symphonies. Partly because he got better every time he wrote symphonies, right? That's how the growth process works. So yeah, and then just didn't want to be perfectionist, and and just to riff on that topic, I mean, that's one of the hardest parts about creativity, and that's why I wrote the book, because I'm trying to encourage people to move through that discomfort. One of the hardest parts is the shipping, because it's actually about vulnerability. That's the hardest part that no one really realizes until you kind of go through it. Oh, it's not really about is the book ready? It's like, am I ready for people to see me? You know, this book is an expression of my authentic self. I get a little deep, I don't know, from, time and again throughout the book. It's showing my mind, it's showing my psychology and what I've integrated throughout my personal development. And that's, when I finished the book, when I did ship it, I felt the initial vulnerability. Oh man, people are going to see this. My friends and family, even, like, oh wow, this is putting myself out there. So that's the part of the creative process that actually stops people the most, and creates the most resistance. Yeah, it's also hard to start. People have a hard time starting creativity, starting their projects. They procrastinate. The finishing and then shipping it can be the hardest thing. And so, yeah, I mean, one of the things I try to touch on in the book is to look at your life with the end in mind, like to work backwards in your life. So like look at your deathbed self and look back and say, what do you want to do while you're here in these precious decades on this planet? And to not waste time, like go do the things you want to do. Like the last page of the book, I have a couple of quotes. The one's by the great Paulo Coelho. And he said, one day you will wake up and there won't be any more time to do the things you've always wanted. Do it now. So yeah, so you can activate people to finish and ship and complete, even if it's not perfect, because time is precious.
Yeah, I love that quote. I'm gonna find it. It's a good quote.
Oh yeah.
It's interesting. So you said that finishing and shipping are the hardest. I don't know if this is like a young person's thing, like before you've ever started anything. But before you've started something, I think the hardest part for me was actually starting. Like if you've never started anything, the most daunting thing is to see yourself as somebody that starts, because it's like you're entering into a new identity. Like you've never done this thing before. You've never been this type of person. And then now you want to do this. Like, okay, I want to play the guitar. But if I actually start playing the guitar, then a part of me has to become okay with saying, I play the guitar, like I am a musician. And that identity shift is really, really difficult sometimes. For me, I think the easiest thing has been to do it slowly, like to commit to something very, very, very minute, and then allow that identity shift to occur subconsciously before I'm conscious of it. Is there anything for you in particular that I guess mirrors that, like that experience of identity shift?
Yeah, that's interesting. Identity shift. I mean, James Clear talks about your habits reflecting your identity. Identity is an interesting thing. I mean, I talk a lot about the authentic self and the true self, and then I think a lot about identity in that sort of intrinsic way, but then there's also identity with what you do with your time. And I'm a musician is it's part of my identity. So the way I form that identity is by every single morning I commit to engaging with my musical study, and that establishes my identity, that cements my identity by following through on that practice. And so it's for sure the case that your habits, your choices are contributing to your identity, especially if it's it's an art form, it's a commitment over a longer time. But you can also look at it as something you can be detached from. It's just I'm picking up the guitar and I'm going to play a little game here. I'm going to see if it's actually on my list for the summer is I'm going to do a PDP, a personal development plan. And I just got a guitar, and I've learned just a couple chords in the past, but I've never really been able to be proficient at the guitar. And so I'm really actually want to build that skill. So I'm going to do a challenge and see if I can practice the guitar every single day for 28 days. And that's a way to make it a game, is to create it in a frame with it, to say just 28 days. And then you're not pressuring yourself to become a guitarist forever. You're just picking something up. Hey, I'm going to see if I can learn this instrument. And it doesn't need to be about your identity. You can just learn the skill. And there's a blog post by, I forget whom, but he said, keep your identity small. And
I love that.
Yeah, just kind of like removing yourself from these labels. I have a section in the book it's titled Apolitical. And I say, like, avoid labeling yourself in your political worldview. Because then we wrapped up into a tribe. Yeah. Right. Can we avoid tribalism and be free? And so if we can keep our identity small and not label ourselves with, even to say, I'm a writer now because I started blogging. Well, forget about that. It's just write. And then you're not anything. You're just you know, and then maybe that can help. But just to speak to the point about starting, that is maybe just as hard, if not harder, than finishing the creative process, especially if you don't have the habit of starting, especially if you don't have that muscle of creative output flexed yet, built up yet. That's often the hardest thing. And I'm actually writing a series of newsletters right now, seeking to activate people to build a website. And I'm calling it Start a Website Week. And I would encourage people, I don't know when this podcast is coming out, that's going to be the last week of May. And the Daily Job Hunt newsletter, you can sign up at CareerHackers.com. And I'm saying, hey, the goal of the week is to start your website. The goal of your week isn't to finish your website. The goal of the week is literally to do like two things, which is to start, just get your account set up on your hosting, your WordPress, etc., and maybe start playing around. And you started, boom, you completed the challenge. Because that's one of the hardest things. I call it the membrane of resistance. And you want to puncture the membrane of resistance, because when you just start, then you start getting more motivation because you got that flow state started a little bit, got the momentum started. So it's a key part of it.
You point out so many interesting metaphors, and it's funny. Like, I had never thought about puncturing the membrane of resistance. That's a good one too. I like the idea of keeping your identity small. What do you think about like keeping your identity small in the sense that you will say something like, I say I'm curious, like so much fits into that, and almost entirely that is good, but like saying these more macro things instead of I'm curious about XYZ, or would you stay away from even that?
Yeah, I mean, curious, that's a pretty innocuous concept. I like saying I'm a curious person. But I'm almost, it's more just, it's a little bit, it's in the description. It's not necessarily a category. it's a feeling as well. Curiosity is a feeling. And so I don't necessarily, when I think of the phrase "I'm curious," I'm not necessarily attaching that to an identity. It's not like the I is not entrenched in the concept of curiosity, right? It's just a natural. I mean, that particular concept is, I think, is very natural. We're born curious animals. We're born curious creatures, and that's a beautiful thing. So, yeah, I mean, I also would say that's a value. It's a value of mine, is growth, which is teamed up with curiosity. So it's maybe that gets a little bit more weight to it when you're defining your core values. But another core value for me would be freedom. So again, if I can detach from things, then and just be my authentic self and not put labels on at all, then I'm going to be meeting that need for freedom. So, but yeah, it's more about like putting people in buckets of groups and tribes. I think that inhibits people in that way.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm pretty cautious about putting myself in a bucket or associating myself with a tribe, because there's this stigma. If you don't have that long tail of things that come with it, you are not it. And I think that the long tail is slightly dangerous sometimes. So I would agree with that.
Yeah, the more you can. I'm reading this book right now called The Mastery of Self by Don Miguel Ruiz Jr.
It's a good book.
You know this book?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah. Many people might know his father, Don Miguel Ruiz, wrote the Four Agreements. Mm-hmm. And this is Don Miguel Ruiz Jr. And yeah, he's just talking about attachments and domestication, like what we learn to conform to what our parents and teachers and peers are asking of us in when we're growing up as children, and we kind of get this conditioning and we learn to fit in and not express what we actually want authentically. And he talks about the projections and that when people are in those states of domestication, attachment to these identities, et cetera, then they want to project it onto you, right? So in the case of a tribe, there might be certain cultural values in the tribe or expectations, and these things are floating around because this is like the dream that Ruiz would call the dream of the world. Everyone has these different projections and unexamined assumptions, etc. And he had a great line in there about, you can be your authentic self no matter what another person's image of you is. Like, you can be aware, okay, this person is projecting an expectation and onto me. That's just them in their own world, because they experienced something when they were a kid that domesticated them and put a layer of conditioning on top of their authentic self, and they're unconsciously projecting that. And we can have compassion for that, and we can just be our authentic self and not take it personally, right? So yeah, anyway, it's fun stuff to talk about.
You mentioned so I think it'd be helpful, because authentic self can mean a lot of different things to different people. What does it mean to you?
Beautiful question. Saying yes when you want to say yes, saying no when you want to say no. It's expressing your genuine interests in the world. It's living with purpose in a way that's aligned with those interests, with the genuine curiosity and desires you have, and expressing that through your purpose and your projects and your pursuits. And it's expressing your personality and not letting others' expectations pull you down in that sort of tall poppy syndrome. It's expressing your joy, your excitement, it's expressing your sadness, your pain, if you choose to do that, if that's true to you, and it's being a fully alive person, you know, and it starts with self-knowledge. You know, I just did a little pithy post the other day. I said, know thyself, be thyself, invest in thyself. So you can't be your authentic self if you don't know your authentic self. You start with self-knowledge, introspection, testing things out, figuring out how you feel when you do certain things, etc., and then getting a solid understanding of who you really are, and then expressing that, being that self, and then continuing to invest in it and growing and developing it. So
I love that. So like, this is funny, but it's so funny to me how I often, and in these conversations, we often do like a full circle around, and
yeah,
we don't even,
that.
yeah, and we don't even realize it. But so this is kind of the image that I'm getting. It's like, you have to be willing to, we'll start far away. At the end of your life, who do you want to be, right? What do you want to be proud about? And you have to recognize that happens in every single individual moment. Like, you are only in control of the present moment. So then taking the present moment and committing to just trying things out, like the little things, committing to making your book, even though, you know, you may not think that it is perfect. Just like that step forward. I've made a step forward, and consistently committing to following your impulses and trying things out and starting things and creating, and then seeing where that takes you. I think it's interesting because the only way that you're going to change is if you commit to something, and if you commit to movement. And the only way to commit to movement is to get over your fear of movement. And it's really interesting because it's kind of like a catch-22. To get over it, you have to do it. And so, like, I don't know. I think it's very, very helpful to people, because the only way that you will get to the end of your life and be happy with who you have become is if you do the things that you're afraid of.
Yeah, there's a lot of value in that statement, because often what we're afraid of is what we most want to do. You know, I think it's Joseph Campbell said, if the treasure is in the cave that you're afraid to enter. Mm-hmm. That's all the hero's journey stuff, right? It's go into the belly of the whale, right? Face these challenges. And that's where Joseph Campbell who's known for the hero's journey, and his famous phrase is follow your bliss. Well, when you follow your bliss, you face the obstacles. So what's your relationship to that? And can you have the courage to persevere and move through that? And yeah, it reminds me of one of the chapters in my book I talk about empathy for the future self, where when we face these challenges and whatnot, if we can get in touch with our why and in touch with the bliss that we could experience in the future, if we have the courage to do the challenging thing, then we can get more motivation internally, rather than, oh, I got to face my fears and conquer my resistance and force myself to do things that are hard. How do we avoid forcing ourselves? Right. So the name of that chapter that in the book is A New Definition of Discipline. I'm questioning the traditional conventions around discipline, which is basically forcing yourself to do things or forcing yourself to not do things. And I'm questioning that premise and say, can we live in the present moment, but also be in touch with our future self? And we can see and love and empathize with the future self you want to experience the freedom, the fulfillment, the excitement, the bliss that we'll get if we can go through this membrane of resistance, right? Then it's going to be so sweet. You're going to get the fruits of your labor. If you can get in touch with that, then it's like, well, of course I'm going to do this. And I'm not going to go watch Netflix. Of course I'm going to do this challenging task, because I get the potential of fulfillment and bliss on the other side.
I hadn't phrased it like that. I do think like that though. This past, what was it, like 6 months or something, I really wanted to ask myself the question of discipline over grace. Like, where do you give yourself discipline and where do you decide to have empathy with yourself or give yourself grace? And I asked myself this because whenever it comes to the things that will happen in the future, life only gets harder as you take on more responsibility and as you become more of an adult. And given that, I want to be in the place where I can give myself grace whenever it is better to give myself grace. Like as a parent, for example, like looking at my mom and looking at my dad, there are definitely moments where them being overwhelmed and upset with themselves didn't help us in the moment. If they would have given themselves grace, moved on, kept on going, that would have helped us better in the moment. So I guess I'm curious about your idea of like, how do we actually stop that though? You were saying getting in touch with this future version of yourself. How do you practically do that though?
Yeah, it's building a relationship with the parts of yourself and building that self-knowledge and self-connection. That's really the core of everything, right? So, I mean, first of all, it's easier said than done to have this mindset of empathy for your current and future self, especially when we grow up in these cultures where our parents and teachers are projecting the experiences they had when they were kids onto us unconsciously, and the cycle of sort of do this or else, right? Punishment, rewards, these things are just thick in the culture. And so that forms the self-talk we often experience, these inner critics and everything. So the more you can do, inner healing, personal growth type work to integrate these parts of you that are criticizing, or you can call them critics or self-hate, self-doubt, whatever you want to call it. That's really the core and foundation. So if you can build your relationship with yourself and be able to start reparenting the parts of yourself in a compassionate way, then you can start to cultivate that sense of wholeness and purpose and intrinsic motivation, right? So rather than this is why I say I want a new definition of discipline, because we typically think of discipline as parent child or teacher child, and we're like making the child do something. And if we can kind of evolve that paradigm into nurturing and encouragement and it's real subtle type psychological stuff, but this is the vision I have for humanity. Is like, when I say empathy for the future self, we can trust ourselves to meet our needs in the short term and long term, right? That's when we're really living from a place of self-leadership and self-trust and wholeness, where we're aligned and trusting ourselves to make decisions in the moment that are not sacrificing our needs. And our needs often involve balancing, weighing present and future. So if you can get to a place where you're realizing that choosing to eat candy is actually not in line with your long-term or even short-term interests. It could be sacrificing needs for health or energy, self-esteem. I mean, if you can see the costs of a particular decision and then weigh that versus, oh, if I choose to not eat candy and instead I choose to drink some tea and then go to bed and get some nourishing sleep, that's going to be serving me in these ways. And you're intrinsically motivated rather than oh, I should get some sleep. Oh, I should make myself not eat candy because the candy is bad. That's the whole reward punishment paradigm that we're typically brought up in. So we can learn to evolve from the shoulds and the have tos and the duties and the making and the rewards punishment and the lack of trust. If we can get into a place of our inner psychology of self-trust, then that's when you cultivate an awareness of your needs, short-term and long-term, and you no longer are making yourself do things, but rather you are choosing to do things because you understand the benefits.
Damn, that was packed. Okay, so this is what I got. Tell me if there's any place that you want to clarify. So it all stems from self-trust. You have learned over time, and I'll throw in a couple of examples as well, just to kind of like more solidify the points. So you've learned throughout your life not to trust yourself. And in some senses, this is because, and not everybody, but a lot of people. I was one of those people. I grew up, people told me what to do, and there was a right and there was a wrong, and I never trusted myself. And so this coming into adulthood is interesting because you have to reteach yourself how to trust yourself, like how to be an adult. And in some senses, you said reparenting. And I love the idea of that because it actually, like, it is that. You gave the example of the candy. In that moment, the question that you have to ask yourself is, why do you want candy? Like, you have to legitimately be a parent to yourself. You have to be able to disconnect for a second and say, okay, well, why do I want candy? Do I need candy? Do I really want it? And if you do really want it, the difference is, I have a lot of grace with myself. I understand this concept of decision fatigue. So if it's late at night, I almost am entirely sure that like I'll make a decision. I'll probably have dessert, and that's okay. Like I know that I probably will, because decision fatigue is basically that later in the evening or after you have already made a lot of decisions throughout the day, it becomes harder to make consciously good decisions. Anywho, so then you ask yourself, like, why do I want this? And the question needs to be kind of consistency. Like, how can I be the most consistent person? Because consistency breeds results. So if you have a small amount of candy tonight, that's not going to kill you, and you can, and that would be entirely fine. But do you actually want it, or is there something deeper in you that is pushing you toward the candy? Is that kind of how it is? And is there anything you'd like to explain a little bit more?
Yeah, asking that why do you want the candy is really key. So again, you're asking yourself, what needs am I trying to get met here? Or what is this part of me? To be even more specific, I'm noticing a part of me wants to eat candy. And then there's maybe a part of you that is wanting to stop you from eating candy. And this, by the way, is drawing from internal family systems therapy model, IFS therapy, which I highly recommend people checking out. And recognizing that there's a multiplicity of parts or subpersonalities that we can kind of get some more clarity about our psychology, where there might be different opinions you have. There's different parts with different opinions. Then you ask, well, what's the purpose of this? This part wants candy for what reason? Oh, he wants to feel comfort or pleasure, or have sense of ease or relaxation or fun. Okay, well, what's going on? Why do you want comfort? Are you stressed out because of X, Y, and Z? And then maybe you can get a little more deep on about what's going on there, what's motivating that. And that's what people often, unfortunately, don't do. And so there's a lot of coping that comes up when people, like with something like candy, for example, or any of these habits, trying to turn to an external to get a short-term need met, but in the pursuit of comfort or pleasure, but then it's sacrificing long-term needs. And so we'll just stick with the food example. Like when there's dependency or addiction with food, it's in that cycle of there's a root problem, or there's a pain, or there's a stress, And in order to dissolve that pain, we turn to the external food, and that alleviates it temporarily, but we never solve the underlying problem, right? Which is there's a pain in your life that needs to be repaired or whatever. And so again, when we get into the intrinsically motivated model, or if we can move toward in that direction of seeking to operate from self-acceptance, self-empathy, self-compassion, self-love. And I say those in really concrete ways, not any sort of fluffy way, like to be kind to yourself, to actually take the risk to be kind to yourself. And then, okay, what's going on there? Oh, I'm feeling stressed. This part of me is stressed and is wanting, maybe you're feeling lonely. Oh, you're lonely. That's why you're turning to the popcorn, right? Because that can numb that, you know. And that's just one example of food, but the message here that hopefully, you know, the way I've been speaking isn't too laborious, but like just be curious about what's going on for you, and come at things from a place of self-compassion, and see if you can build from there, so that you're operating from intrinsic motivation rather than forcing yourself.
Yeah. And on the topic of the reparenting, for myself, I found it very helpful to like whenever I have moments that I could potentially judge myself harshly or be harsh to myself, to treat myself as though I were my own parent. Like if I were the child,
yeah,
and I were, you know, and I were watching myself do this thing, how would I respond? How would I act? What would I say? Or even if I was my best friend, like how would I treat somebody else in the same situation? And then giving myself the grace and compassion to do the exact same, because like you never want to hurt yourself. You never want to sully those lines of trust that you have with yourself. Like that is the closest relationship that you have, your relationship with yourself. So that needs to become of the utmost important.
Yeah, the reparenting, the inner child is really the key of everything, in a sense, where if you can get connected to the little kid you once were, that's when you move in the direction of self-integration, wholeness, authenticity, as opposed to disconnecting from that part of you and then it's shutting it away. In the IFS therapy model, that's called an exiled part. It's the deepest layer of like a wounded child that got locked away because you suppressed it as a way to cope through a challenging, adverse situation, as for example, and then you disassociate from that pain or whatnot, and then it's temporarily alleviated, but then it's never actually processed. And so if you can reconnect to the inner child and to build a relationship with your inner child, then you're going to start really building that self leadership, is another way to put it. And a great tip for that, if someone wants one of these little nuggets of tips to take away from the podcast, is find a photo of yourself as a child and put that up. At one point I had like a photo of myself as the desktop background on my computer. And you just have a photo of yourself somewhere around where you can just see that, and you just kind of start subconsciously like connecting with that inner child.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
Yeah, that's going to be really, really helpful in kind of getting that ball moving. And this is a process, you know. I mean, this is something I've been diving into for a decade plus, this type of deep layers, and continuing to grow. And yeah, also I would, before I forget, I would encourage listeners to, I know you interviewed our mutual friend Nick Rundlet on this podcast about his work in helping people let go of these subconscious beliefs that we form as children in these childhood environments, in these this domestication, or however you want to term it, if we can let go, like for example, in a belief like I don't trust myself, I can't trust myself, right? If you have this subconsciously underneath you, it's hard to build self-trust. And so finding these deeper layers in doing this deep inner work is, if that's something you haven't done yet, it can be a little bit daunting to start that. But if you can have that courage to look at the truth, right? Which is, you have this inner child that had this XYZ experiences, and you want to process those experiences if they aren't processed yet, right? And that's where you build the foundation.
My gosh, I love that. Okay. I could probably talk to you for a long time, but we are going to hit our rapid fire questions.
Ooh, fun.
Yeah, they're fun. I'm actually playing around with the idea of switching them up. I like keeping the same questions because to see how different people answer them is always interesting. But at the same time, sometimes the question just speaks out to me. So we'll see what happens. Okay, the first question, what do you value in life?
Growth mindset and authenticity.
Love that. What is a good life?
Ooh. The good life is when what you think, say, and do are in harmony.
Yeah.
And to elaborate on that would be, what you think is to think consciously. When you start by living consciously and then follow through in your actions, that's living with integrity, and that's the good life.
I love that. In the spirit of both your book and Career Hackers, what is a piece of advice for young professionals trying to, honestly, Career Hackers is very entrepreneurial based. Like it has stuff for everybody, but it's catered to the entrepreneur for sure, the young entrepreneur. What would you say is the main focus that somebody who is a young professional wanting to get into entrepreneurship or just kind of define their own career and life, what is one thing that they need to focus on or do?
Let's say the habit of creating. Can you make creativity a habit and integrate that into your daily life in a habitual way, just like you brush your teeth? Can you create every single day? And when you build one block at a time, eventually you have cathedral. So create, and that's the essence of entrepreneurship. And one other piece of advice would be to seek out people with experience and ask them questions. And they're going to be flattered to tell you about their experience. And if you build rapport with them, just ask them genuine questions, invite them on your podcast, whatever, then you're going to get a lot of value from connecting with people who are building a network that's not just horizontal in terms of age, but vertical.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And last question, if you could only leave one piece of advice for the world and generations below you, what would it be?
Follow your bliss, and be honest with yourself.
I love that. Perfect mic drop moment.
I'm seeking to be succinct.
Thank you so much, Joel, for coming on the podcast. I'm going to put all of your information in the description below so people can find you and find Career Hackers. And you have DJH, and then you also have a podcast. Is there anything else you want me to make sure that I get out to people?
Yeah, I mean, you can, I have a couple podcasts. One of them is Exponentially Empowered, that's inactive at the moment. I'm not sure that's going to be activated, but the one I'm doing right now is the DJH podcast. So I have the Daily Job Hunt newsletter, and then I'm doing audio version of that. And I'm just reading the newsletter and then riffing on it. And it's like 3-minute episodes every day. And so if you're looking for a little kick of maybe some inspiration, some creative hype or whatever, and it's just 3 minutes, and you're already listening to a podcast right now. So I know you can just take out, if you're driving, be safe, don't do it right now, but you can just take out that app, and then you get the Daily Job Hunt podcast. And then if you're not tired of my voice and you want more of it, then you can add that.
It's super practical. I have high standards whenever it comes to the stuff that I open on my email. Like I literally open nothing. I just archive everything, and I do open the Daily Job Hunt. So nice job
thanks.
with that. Yeah.
I'm flattered.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I really, really appreciated you. And this conversation was one for the books for sure.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was definitely one for the books. I really had an enjoyable time, and I love getting deep and riffing. So hopefully we can do it again in the future in some way, shape, or form.
Sounds good.
I hope that you found this episode enriching. I would love to hear your thoughts. If you would like to write a rating or a review, that would be fantastic. You can also follow me at Incapable Podcast. I'm looking forward to our next episode. Cheers.